This is Trine Days, roundtable number 10. Let's fulfill JFK's dream for world peace. A plan for action with host Chris Milligan and featuring husband and wife co-authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould. I am Bruce DeTorres. I moderate these roundtables. And these were inspired by The Valediction, which is Paul and Liz's two-book novelized memoir about being the first American journalists allowed to return to Afghanistan after the Soviet Union invaded in 1979. When Paul and Liz returned, corporate media didn't want to broadcast the truths that they had found over there. Paul and Liz began a journey into history and mysticism, which they discovered is the real power behind empires. After Paul and Liz present, we'll open it up to everyone. But first, our host, Chris Milligan.
How to do. Thank all for coming. Started publishing about 20 years ago, not really knowing why, but it keeps happening. Paul and Liz's second book just finally got printed. We've been having a lot of supply issue problems in the printing world, but it got printed. Will be it shipped yesterday, and so that will be out, and it continues this incredible story. And you know, another book I published was Kent's book, The End. The end also means that there's a new beginning, and that's really where we are. And now there's been, a lot of sacred books out there, and they basically come down to saying we're all brothers and sisters, and we should treat each other like we would want to treat ourselves, and also to treat our Mother Earth very well. And you know, I have a book that I found very, very interesting when I was growing up. It's called Healing Earth More, and it's about mud. Okay, and there's a guy by the name of Paracelsus, and he used to go. There's this valley in the Alps. It's above sea level, and it has a well, actually, the valley goes below sea level, and it's completely granite. And when the last ice age came over, it went and turned the dirt on top of itself. So it's kind of a moor, it's kind of a peat. It's never dried out for 10,000 years. And there's herbs in there that are completely extinct in other places around the world, but they're there in the mud. And what has happened over these 10,000 years is this mud has natural hormones. It has all kinds of things in it. And Paracelsus called it his quintessence of life. And modern researchers have found it. They'll take like anthrax and put anthrax into it, and it turns anthrax into a beneficial bacteria. What this mud does is it takes things that are quote unquote enemies and turns them either into friends or makes them benign. Okay. And so I've been very optimistic about the future. I really think that we've got a paradigm shift here going to happen. And part of that shift has to do with the story that Paul and Liz are talking about, and the Fitzgerald, and the assassination of JFK, and JFK's vision for world peace. I mean, do we need world peace? This is a journey we're all on. Let's take it together. Let's have a good time. Paul and Liz brought up this idea of having a concert for world peace. I thought that was a wonderful idea, something to happen all over the world, because this is something that we need, and onwards to a better future.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, we certainly want to welcome you all to roundtable number 10. Let's fulfill JFK's dream for world peace with a plan for action. And as you just heard, you know, that plan for action includes an awful lot of work that has to be done. So listen carefully to where we are. But before starting today's discussion on how we grew our mystical muscles by connecting to Paul's Irish roots over the past 3 decades, I will present a summary of the last roundtable to get you up to speed. First, we need to take a deep breath and unlock our negative feelings of fear about the threats we face from endless war agendas. If we don't unlock our positive creative power to imagine the peaceful world we want, it will not be able to materialize as our future. Once we unlock the full potential of building a real peace foundation from the ground up, it will last for an eternity. The next step is transforming JFK's June 10, 1963 American University speech, and I recommend anyone here who hasn't already read it or listened to it, please do. It will be turned into a declaration of human rights for the 21st century through world peace, intertwined with historical and mythical stories from his Fitzgerald family's Irish roots. The declaration would be delivered at a concert filled with healing music. It will be modeled after the 1985 Live Aid concert for famine relief in Africa. The sponsors of Live Aid took an issue nobody cared about, but it was put in front of 2 billion people through music and raised $127 million. Not only are millions of lives still at risk today from famine in the third world, the first world is facing its own unprecedented food crisis right now in our time. This exposes the truth that famine relief was never going to be a remedy for famine itself. Our concert will promote real solutions, the only solutions, establishing a worldwide peace as the only underlying foundation that will address all human-made problems. This music will be modeled after the American tribal love rock musical Hair. In its time, Hair was the center of the anti-war Vietnam movement, delivering a riveting political and social awakening that we experienced in 1970 as participants in the Boston production. Its finale song, Flesh Failures, Let the Sun Shine In, still stirs the soul. It will become an anthem for the peace movement we are building. The concert will be a reawakening to bring back the peaceful world we thought we were creating, but was robbed from our generation by dark forces manipulating from behind the scenes. These forces did destroy our generation's cohesion, but our vision for activating world peace today is even more inspired towards action by what we connected to back then. And now we will have to make a big departure from the toxic war narrative to transmute the tone and reorient people's thinking towards peace as the only solution. And this can be accomplished by connecting to our shared past in Ireland, the land that gave birth to the prophecy of the Fitzgerald family's most beloved ancestor, Geroidi Arla. It has been believed for 800 years that he will rise from the dead at the end of time to free the Irish people from the enslavement of empire. And this is the time now for the fulfillment of that prophecy. And it can be accomplished by resurrecting JFK's peace plan for world peace. The perfect setting for a concert that will promote world peace through healing music will be at the 5,500-year-old UNESCO World Heritage Site north of Dublin, known as Newgrange, or in Irish, Brunagusa. The site is central to pre-Christian Irish mythology, having been built by the Dagda, father of the Tuatha De Na, people of the Shi. Known as the Good Father, he was a benefactor to all the people. Described as a passage grave, the Brew was a house where the dead could pass in and out of supernatural reality into this world at will. But most of all, Newgrange stimulates something in the imagination, a deeper connection to the past and the evolution of human thought that has been lost and forgotten to both the East and the West. And now Paul will present how Newgrange was brought to our attention in a most mystical way and has continued to draw us into its mystical vortex to this day. Connecting to Newgrange through our experience is a good place to start growing your mystical muscles too.
Thank you, Liz. I wanted to give you some background on Newgrange and the implications of what it means for the past and the future as well. So we were first brought into the mystical vortex of Newgrange, the ancient megalithic passage tomb, on August 1st, 1997, at Dublin Airport when the young driver of the shuttle bus posed a question after reading the name tag on our luggage. "Who's the Fitzgerald?" "We are," my son responded. "Well, so am I," he said. That was the first hint that something unusual was happening on our visit to Ireland. In the old pagan Celtic calendar, August 1st was the feast of Lunasa, in honor of the Irish god Lu, brother of the Dagda, the chief god of the supernatural race known as the Tuatha De Danann. And oddly enough, Newgrange was his home too. The second hint came when I asked the young man where he came from. "Oh, it's just a little village down past Limerick. I'm sure you've never heard of it. It's called Abbeyfield." "That's my grandfather's village," I told him. "We're from the same place." Was this coincidence, a synchronicity, or something more? "Well, whatever you do when you're in Ireland," he said, "there's one place you must go. It's called Newgrange, Bruingusa in Irish, Angus's mansion on the River Boyne. I'd take you there myself, but I've got to work. It's only a 20-minute drive from where you're headed, and it's the most amazing thing you'll ever see." I knew that returning to Ireland would complete something I'd started when I'd first visited there back in 1971. But it wasn't until we were directed to Newgrange by another Fitzgerald from the same village as my family on the other side of Ireland that I realized that something was far more profound than anything I'd experienced in my lifetime. Jung described the concept of synchronicity or coincidence as a, quote, acausal connecting principle that joined the rational ego of the senses to the daimonic ego of the irrational other self, which then overlapped into our reality. The daimon was well known to the ancient philosophers as the causer of déjà vu, the feeling of having experienced a present moment once before. To the classical Greeks, it was a supernatural spirit guide who caused coincidences to happen in order to shape our destiny. Was this message from another Fitzgerald part of an acausal connection, directing me to apply our 6 years of research on the Fitzgerald family to something at Newgrange? Within a few days, we'd made our way to the Boyne Valley and had to shield our eyes from the glare of the quartz crystals shining in the bright sunlight. The young Fitzgerald from Abbeyfield had been more than right. From a distance, Newgrange looked like a giant, futuristic time machine. But as we soon learned, that time machine hadn't arrived from the future, but had traveled 5,000 years out of the past. Originally built in the shape of an egg, its exterior was now a drum-shaped flying saucer with a facade covered by 11 feet of quartz that glowed like an ancient solar timepiece in the early morning sun. In fact, even after 5,000 years, it still kept perfect time by focusing an intense, almost laser-like light into the darkness of Bruingusa for exactly 17 minutes every winter solstice. Wealthy Romans had once made pilgrimages to it from Britain and left precious offerings of gold and jewelry to propitiate the spirits of its powerful gods, the Tuatha De Danann. And it was suspected that large crowds of people had once filled its huge natural amphitheater to participate in a yearly ritual hinted at in ancient annals as involving music, magic, and, quote, many-colored checkered lights. Newgrange was older than the temples of Mycenae and the pyramids, but like the pyramids, which appeared to have had some ceremonial function in addition to their role as tombs, what else did this quartz palace do? Was measuring the solstice the only reason its builders had labored for years to build the exact movement of the sun, to plot the exact movement of the sun? And why, over all the other sacred sites around the world, did Joseph Campbell consider this place to be the home of the most sought after of all relics, the Holy Grail? It wasn't until we probed Campbell's well-known book, The Masks of God, that pieces of the mystery of Angus's mansion began to fall into place. By various schools of modern scholarship, Campbell wrote, quote, the Grail has been identified with the Dagda's cauldron of plenty, the begging bowl of the Buddha in which 4 bowls from 4 quarters were united, the Kaaba of the great mosque of Mecca, and the ultimate talismanic symbol of some sort of Gnostic Manichaean rite of spiritual initiation, practiced possibly by the Knights Templar. Limited to being a passage tomb by modern scholars, the mansion of Angus in Irish myth was described as a place where Angus could go to visit his dead friends making it quite literally a house where the dead could pass in and out of supernatural reality at will. It was also a place where the living could experience what awaited them in the spirit world beyond. Having been carbon dated to at least 3500 BCE, Bruingusa was far older than Irish or Celtic culture and is now thought by some to represent the zenith of a peaceful golden era of human existence that reached from Anatolia in the Near East across Europe into the heart of ancient Ireland. The Grail has been the object of occult quests for millennia as the divine chalice of becoming. And according to Campbell, Bruingusa represented the place where it could be found, making it a sacred domain suspended between the world of matter and the realm of pure spirit. Campbell's statement was a mythological Rosetta Stone, tying together a deep vein of mythology about the origins of human spiritual existence, together with a little understood prehistory of Europe. But as the poet and mythologists George Russell and W.B. Yeats testified, it was also a metaphor for a transubstantiation of mind and matter from the irrational ego to the rational. To their minds, the egg-shaped mansion of Angus was where Dagda, the ancient father-son god of the Tuatha De Danann, impregnated matter with light and brought forth a race of invisible beings who are to this day regarded as operating behind the scenes. So how did this dreamlike transformation from light to matter work? In 1897, George Russell, the mystic poet and prominent Gaelic revivalist, known by the initials AE, visited Newgrange in the company of fellow mystic William Butler Yeats. Russell left an account of the impression the monument made on him in his poem, A Dream of Angus Og. Quote, as he spoke, he paused before a great mound grown over with trees, and around it, silver clear in the moonlight, were immense stones piled, the remains of an original circle. And there was a dark, low, narrow entrance leading therein. This was my palace. In days past, many a one plucked ere the purple flower of magic and the fruit of the tree of life. And even as he spoke, a light began to glow and to pervade the cave, and to obliterate the stone walls and the antique hieroglyphics engraven thereon, and to melt the earthen floor into itself like a fiery sun suddenly uprisen within the world. And there was everywhere a wandering ecstasy of sound. Light and sound were one. Light had a voice, and the music hung, glittering in the air. I am Angus, men call me the young. I am the sunlight in the heart, the moonlight in the mind. I am the light at the end of every dream, the voice forever calling to come away. I am desire beyond joy or tears. Come with me, come with me. I will make you immortal, for my palace opens into the gardens of the sun, and there are the fire fountains which quench the heart's desire in rapture. Not bad for 1897. The Boyne Valley monuments have played an important but little known role in British politics. In the late 19th century, a fanatical group of British Israelites excavated nearby at the ancient seat of Irish kings at Tara, attempting to prove Britain's descent from ancient Israel and the house of King David. Convinced the Ark of the Covenant was buried there, they found no ark, but did succeed in scattering 5,000 years of ancient Irish history, leaving Tara more a looted graveyard than a magical court of legendary heroes and kings. After witnessing Newgrange in all its shining glory, it made us wonder whether the destruction was accidental or done intentionally to obscure its true history. But then we learned that the Newgrange of today is not the mansion of Angus it was when viewed by George Russell and William Butler Yeats under a full moon in 1897. Newgrange had been significantly altered in the 1960s to conform to the restorer's idea of what it might have looked like some 5,300 years ago, and not what it was carefully designed to do. According to one of many critics who have studied the reconstruction, despite all the effort put into restoring Newgrange's magnificent appearance, quote, "It doesn't work like it used to," wrote Hugh Kearns, author of The Mysterious Checkered Lights of Newgrange. And if it were made to work again, and it could, then the number of visitors would soon be back to the original Stone Age levels. As a modern Irish designer and engineer, Hugh Kearns believes that in addition to having had a ritual significance, Newgrange once functioned as a kind of light machine, capable when constructed properly of projecting images through use of its checkered lights. To prove his theory, he constructed a scale model that when tested worked to perfection. So if true, was Newgrange somehow used by ancient engineers to project the images of fallen heroes as recorded in the Irish annals? Was it really a place where Angus could go to visit his dead friends? Or was Newgrange providing the power with its quartz crystals, solstice sun, and musical tones to do something more? And was that something more the power to access the inner workings of an organic otherworld hologram, and not just its emulation? Newgrange felt eerily familiar to us when we first saw it that day glistening in the sun. Its original purpose was clearly more than just a burial mound, and we soon learned that the origin mythology of the Fitzgerald family's arrival in Ireland mirrored its origin mythology as well. The myths that had been applied to the chief god of the Tuatha De Danann, the Dagda, and his son Angus were applied to the Earl of Desmond and his son Gearoid, and remain alive to this day. The fact that we'd been directed there out of the blue by another Fitzgerald from my grandfather's village qualified as a genuine synchronicity, the so-called book falling off the shelf. And we were eventually to discover the legendary power of the family name possessed truly mythic qualities of its own. Quote, the family's Irish myth makers were capable of grafting the Geraldines onto a native historical tradition that traced their lineage back to the Greeks, while at other times and for different audiences, the family could make plausible claims to an Italian and ultimately Trojan lineage. The old adage that the Geraldines became more Irish than the Irish themselves fails to capture the Geraldine experience in medieval Ireland in all its richness and variety. Editors Peter Crook and Sean Duffy wrote in the preface to 2017's The Geraldines and Medieval Ireland, The Making of a Myth. And so in writing our dream-inspired novel, The Voice, and our new book, Valediction, Resurrection, we found ourselves building on all the richness and variety of the mythology that we could find. And ultimately, we came to discover that the Geraldine myth was not only firmly grounded in reality, but that the reality was firmly planted in an other world of dreams, synchronicities, and coincidences, and that those coincidences are caused by something known as the diamond. I had made the decision to investigate my family based on my daughter Alyssa's dream in 1991, in which my deceased father visited her accompanied by an 800-year-old man in a strange plaid suit. His message was clear: fix the memory of the family. And so as we wrote our novel, The Voice, the mythology of Newgrange became incorporated into the story. And as we worked toward a publishing date in 2001, the importance of Newgrange as a character became clear. Following the publication of our two books on Afghanistan in 2009 and 2011, we began working with members of the Afghan diaspora on a peace conference and recommended Newgrange as a neutral location for the Afghan people to come together and settle their differences. Aside from sharing a long colonial heritage with Britain and Ireland, Afghanistan shared an ancient legacy of tribal law and secular codes of moral conduct that long preceded the Christian and Islamic eras. Ireland's pre-Christian Brehon laws provided a sophisticated set of rules for every aspect of Irish society. According to the legendary 19th century British agent Alexander Burns, prior to hostile European invasions, Pashtunwali was a guide for a peaceful and hospitable Afghanistan that was known to accommodate both Jews and Christians, considering them both to be religions of the book. We believed a new and shocking departure from the existing narrative was needed to change the tone of the Afghan crisis and reorient people's thinking. As part of the indigenous solution to restore the true Afghanistan, Afghans needed to allow themselves an escape from the existing extremist narrative by reconnecting to an ancient shared past. We believed this could be achieved by holding initial planning sessions at Newgrange with Afghan leaders and organizations from around the world to share their knowledge as advisors and supporters. And this proposal was totally embraced by our Afghan partners. That dream of an Afghan peace was never fulfilled. but we are now resurrecting the concept centered on Newgrange to inaugurate a declaration of human rights for the 21st century through world peace. That plan would be delivered as a musical concert at Newgrange. We hope you can join with us to help make it a reality. Thank you.
And now I want to tell you a little bit of an extra story about our Afghan friends that is connected to what Paul just laid out about Newgrange. You just heard about the effort that we put forth to help the Afghan people break free from the war mentality by holding a planning session at Newgrange. I am now going to introduce you to a very special Afghan. Like JFK, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan ultimately dedicated his life to creating peace. Few in the West have ever heard his name and his inspiring story. We will change that by including it as an important part of the world peace movement we are envisioning. It was in 1929 that Khan, a peer of India's Gandhi, inaugurated Afghanistan's indigenous nonviolent movement, the Kunde Khidmatkar. Following Britain's occupation of Afghan tribal lands east of the Hindu Kush Mountains in 1848, moderate Pashtun institutions were replaced with a severe and undemocratic penal code known as the Frontier Crimes Regulations. Khan's organization pledged to reform Pashtun society away from the use of force with a nonviolent movement aimed at resisting British rule. Although organized like an army, his recruits totally embraced an oath to renounce violence and never touch any weapons. Membership, initially estimated at about 1,000, eventually exceeded 100,000, and that included both men and women. At the time of the creation of Pakistan in 1948, out of these Afghan tribal lands, Khan's movement was made illegal. I think that is an indication of how powerful it was. But its power lived on and continued to inspire new generations of Afghans to embrace nonviolence. The unique concept of nonviolence that Khan had created was defined by Gandhi himself when he answered Khan's question during exchange during one of their visits. Quote, "You have been preaching nonviolence in India for a long time now, but I started teaching the Pashtuns nonviolence only a short time ago. Yet in comparison, Pashtuns seem to have grasped the idea of nonviolence quicker and much better than the Indians. How do you explain that?" Gandhi replied, quote, "Nonviolence is not for cowards. It is for the brave and for the courageous. And the Pashtuns are brave and courageous. That is the reason why the Pashtuns are able to remain nonviolent." The Kunde Khidmatkar movement is a part of Afghanistan's lost history that challenges the ideas expressed by many Orientalists, that the Pashtun people were inherently violent and that this movement was just an aberration. Instead, this wrong-headed idea is based on a profound misinterpretation of Afghan history, especially in comprehending the true meaning of the Afghan tribal code, Pashtunwali. Now titled "Nonviolence is for the Brave and the Courageous, the Rise of the Kunde Khidmatkar Movement," we will be including this in our next roundtable. And now we are going to open up for questions and comments.
It's great to see everyone and my California buddies here, and it really inspires and invigorates me to see people from my past who have meant so much, Carol, Lynn, and of course the Fitzgeralds. I was thinking, what if you brought together at the concert the Afghan groups that you've talked about, but also maybe, I'm thinking about like the Olympics, they have this team in this country, but I mean, Vietnam, other countries that we've decimated, ruined, that need peace. I mean, not need peace, but that we need to heal ourselves from. The places America has, the list is endless, but anyway, it's a
Well, I would have to totally agree with you. I think the inclusion of the Afghans, I think, is that's why I wanted to let you know about the story about their incredible nonviolent movement that is still in existence today and still very powerful. And as I mentioned, very few in the West have ever heard of it. And Bachir Han was actually, and his organization was actually shut down because he was so effective. He spent, I think, something like a third of his life in prison, on and off. So I think that the idea of, I think the reason it's so important also is because of the complete misrepresentation of the Afghan people to the West. It breaks my heart every time I hear people think that what they're looking at now in Afghanistan is the way it always was. Afghanistan did not have any refugees in 1978. Afghanistan had moved women's right to the point where something in the range of 60% of the students at Kabul University in the 70s were women. Okay, so all of these ideas about what Afghanistan was have been so completely lost to this completely fraudulent idea of the warrior code, which basically imprisons women. I mean, this is not what Afghanistan was. Women were given the right to vote in Afghanistan in 1923. I think it was before women in the United States got the right to vote, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a lot of, it isn't just that their country was used by Zbigniew Brzezinski to basically, to destroy by what he did and ultimately destroy. It was the fact that their entire identity was completely destroyed. And that must be the most painful part of the experience for the Afghans. So that is why if we can help the Afghans build their own sense of recognition by the world, by this amazing Bachir Han's movement, by making it a centerpiece, because his movement, I think, said it all. I mean, it actually requires more courage to be nonviolent than to be violent. If we can get that message across, I think we have a very powerful campaign.
And we aren't looking to just have a concert at Newgrange, but this is a worldwide thing. And it's not something that's just to be directed by us, but there should, people in their own little area can create their own little concert. And, things get done. There was, a while back in Iceland, the women went on strike. 95% of them went on strike, and and changed that country. Okay, and that's really, I mean, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a whole bunch of us to do this, and it needs to be done worldwide. Yes, the United States Army has done a bunch of bad things. Other people's armies, it's really, it's a worldwide thing, because again, it's one ball that is going through space here, and we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to learn how to get along, okay, without killing each other. So it's a worldwide thing. And so we're looking for help from everybody. And who doesn't want peace in the world? Why wouldn't people want to get involved?
Exactly.
I think I'd like to just say something about this place, Newgrange. The Boyne Valley is a magical, absolutely magical place. If any of you have ever been there or even close to it, you can remark on it. It's an ancient setup. It's a natural amphitheater that was carved out by glaciers millions of years ago, and it's stunning in terms of its ability to have, just simply by being there and looking up at Newgrange itself, is just it's just like that poem from George Russell back in 1897.
I've got a book here called The Language of the Goddesses. And one thing it says in here, it says, the cosmic egg as a womb of the world likely is the underlying idea of the ground plans of Newgrange, the gigantic round mound of Ireland, covered with white quartz. Newgrange looks like a huge egg-shaped dome. The color of the quartz must have been of great significance, because quartz is not found near Newgrange. So hundreds of tons had to be transported to the site, probably from the Wicklow Mountains, about 40 miles to the south. So, and it says, it is unlikely that the New Grange builders undertook such a vast project for purely decorative.
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, the first thing that struck us when we saw it was that this is some kind of ancient engineering. So what's the, and so what is the engineering for? What is it intended to do?
Well, actually,
You're talking about mysticism and stuff. Well, just like the Earth has ley lines. Okay, the Chinese,
Yes.
they would even, if you look in China, I mean, they even repurpose the way some mountains looked and everything so that they would do good on the lines. And your body also has ley lines because your body is a one unital value, just like the Earth is a one unital value. Okay,
Right.
and so we can access our mystic power and change the world.
This is so exciting, and I really feel it's time. We have to come together to the forces that are happening are dark magic. That's what it is. It's dark magic that's happening on the world, and it knows exactly how to manipulate and make things happen. And I don't think anything but a kind of white magic is the counter to that. We have to understand that there is a knowledge and a power of how you create reality and align it with wholeness and goodness, that this is all about, that I feel is, yes, we need this, and it's really good to have this focal point. There's something about music and world music. I feel like when you were, Joyce, talking about Vietnam, I was thinking that it would be interesting to have musical representation of all the countries that have been devastated recently. And because I mean, I once heard an Afghan lullaby that haunted me for years. It just went inside my bones, inside my marrow, and took me to an incredibly mystical place. But I was thinking about Vietnamese and Syrian and just every single one of these places as a part of a healing ritual that I think would be just so potent. And the other thing I wanted to say is I'm taking a course in Egyptian, I don't know, a lot of things Egyptian. And there's a lot of research that's been going on the pyramids. And there's an understanding that these pyramids are really old. They're probably 12 older than 12,000 years. They happened before the floods happened. But one of the things that they were saying, this technology is not a death chamber. It's actually an initiation chamber that a human being can go to the dimension of where the dead go and come back again. And there are hieroglyphs on in the Egyptian temples of priests, and the priests that actually did that, they went into the tombs and they went on this journey into these other dimensions. They would be allowed to wear a leopard skin. And so on the hieroglyphs, you find these priests with leopard skins, and they were the ones that, and the reason why this was so important was that only somebody that had completely interfaced with death has the capacity to have the integrity to really have power. Because if you're afraid of death, then you will distort power. So in order for somebody to be given the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, they had to have gone all the way into the death realm and back again. And then there was a deep initiation into full power. And I believe that New Grange is about that. It's about that knowledge of dimensionality, of our capacity, of our consciousness to travel in those kinds of ways and know in those kinds of ways that and I feel like this is part of what is so exciting, because we need to, first of all, anytime anyone goes to the pyramids and begins to research in ways that open that up, they're shut down. They don't want human beings to get that that's who we are.
Well, we can do that. We can do that with New Grange. We can do that with New Grange.
Yes, we are dimensional travelers. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say for now, but I'm so excited.
Well, that's why I recommended that anybody who hasn't read his speech, I think that would be the first thing, read his speech. It will be part of the upcoming roundtable when we're talking about Bachir Han and the nonviolent movement, because he is a perfect balance with JFK, I think, in terms of bringing in that the suffering of the Afghan people and the crisis that the U.S. obviously created and the deep history of our involvement with it. Okay, I couldn't think of anything more powerful to do than combine those two histories together. Okay, to make that clear about the contribution that was made by Bachir Han it was his life's work, completely equal to what JFK was trying to do too.
And peace is an action. Peace is an action. Okay. It is going to take concerted effort to do this. Okay. To do a concert in Newgrange. I mean, just because we say we want to do it, it's not going to, it's going to take a lot of work and stuff to do. I mean, just like world peace isn't just going to happen. Okay. It's going to take work. It's going to take, that is the goal. Right. And that was the goal of JFK, was to, at that point in time that we were in the midst of a Cold War. OK, we had just come off the Berlin crisis and all kinds of different things like that. The world, sure, we've got a war in the Ukraine right now. And so things are that way. But it was really much more of a tense type thing. I mean, we were, the kids were going underneath the desk because the Ruskies were going to bomb us and everything. So JFK had been through war, okay? And so he was trying very hard to have dialogue with the Russians, and he was dealing with, generals that just wanted to bomb him, okay? But, again, it gets back to, it's one world. We all breathe the same air, what Mr. Kennedy said. And so again, peace is an action. It is something we have to do. And like any action, you have to start, you have to begin, and you have to work at it and go for it. So, this is what this is. This is a beginning of trying to realize JFK's vision for world peace. I mean, he had to talk to Nikita Khrushchev and start, get reducing of all these bombs that we're facing at each other. So it's not something that's going to happen lightly, and it's not something that I'm looking for the politicians. I don't think the politicians are going to do it. But it's something that the people can do. We can do it.
Think of peace as a verb.
Right. Well, I also want to remind everybody about the fact that peace is for heroes and courageous people. When you really give up the war, remember what I just told you about the recruits that came into Bachir Han's organization. They committed to never touching, never going near a weapon or violence. Imagine how easily the world could be transformed if right now, I believe truthfully, there are a lot of real warriors out there saying the war, when it's endless war, it doesn't work. There's nothing for anybody with endless war.
We spent a lot of time in the from mid 1970s until into the 1990s with the people who negotiated with the Soviets in terms of reducing weapons, in terms of controlling weapons and aggression. Paul Warnke was very friendly in terms of helping us understand what was actually going on. He drafted the SALT II agreement. He'd been there on SALT I as well. He'd been I think he'd been the Navy secretary or the assistant Navy secretary at one point, very high level guy. And you look at this guy, he basically told us, he said, everything that I have seen in my lifetime about the Soviet Union is that they're afraid. They've been attacked so many times. He said that there's a road that goes into Moscow. It's called the Tartar Road, because every 50 years, the Tartars came down that road and attacked the people in Moscow, in the village there. So he said that's what their mentality is. He said it's natural to them. It's part of their understanding about the way they live. And he said they want nothing more than to work with the rest of the world in terms of getting out of that mentality and they thought they had in 1991 and 1992. And that's what's so truly tragic about the events that are occurring today, because the same old forces that were at it back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s are drumming it up again. So the fact is that now more than ever, I think the idea that we change the attitude, we change the mentality, and we create a new mythology, a mythology of peace, and be very aggressive. As I said, it's what you're saying, Chris, is correct. It's an action word. Peace is an action word. Make it a verb. I'm going to peace you. I'm going to take your gun. I'm going to take your gun and I'm going to turn it into a rainbow. How's that? Or a cloud.
Well, I think that you have made that key point that peace takes courage. And John F. Kennedy, he obviously knew in a very deep, profound way that his efforts towards peace could also lead to his death. And I think all of the great leaders had that same amount of courage, and they spoke out. And in the 20th century, many of the greatest leaders were assassinated, were murdered. And it was very deliberate. It was to send a message to the rest of the world, to frighten people into obedience, submission, and to control people through fear. But people keep rising up and speaking out. I think we see it today. The great truth tellers are under the most vicious attack. I think Julian Assange is a prime example, and particularly because he was trying to expose the shadow side of the empire, and he succeeded on a worldwide scale. And so now he is being crucified. There's never been a greater attack on whistleblowers. And here in California, we have the legislation which is obliterating the First Amendment rights to speak out against the dominant narrative. Here in California is horrific, and I think we need that same level of courage to speak truth and also to move us towards a peaceful resolution. It's sad that the left, there's no left because it's been so utterly compromised that it's cheerleading the militancy of the United States and buying into these false narratives to shore up this rampage, and it's all through the lies. So we personally, I think, have to take it on to be as courageous as possible, to speak our truths, and to work as passionately towards peace as JFK did. And I am supportive of these efforts. There's also, speaking of synchronicities, there's a series out called Outlander. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's based on a novel where a woman goes to the Standing Stones in Scotland, and she's transported through time.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful series, but I think it makes people who watch it wonder about, the difference between myth and reality, dream and reality, and the power of place and time and energy and spirit.
Well, that's why I mentioned the Boyne Valley. The Boyne Valley is filled, all over Ireland and all of Northern Europe, all the way to Anatolia, all the way to Turkey. You have these examples of these kinds of architectures. Gulbekli Tepe in Turkey is just, it's far older. In fact, they can't even, our current, anthropologists and geologists can't explain it, because there's certain architectural things at Gulbekli Tepe that weren't supposed to have been done until, 400 or 5,000 BC rather, or 4,000 BC, and they happened far older than that. So 11,000, 12,000 years ago.
Well, I would like to make one very quick point to what Carol said. I think that one of the reasons I have come to the belief that in order for this project that we are trying to inaugurate and trying to push forward, I really think in order for it to truly take off worldwide, This really has to be just about peace. We right now, as a people, have been split apart in every single way. And if you try to deal with all these split issues that people are literally, they're trapped in the dialectic. You're either good or evil, depending on which side you're on. So my hope is that by opening up the door to peace, to the true, to the ones who have the courage to say, yeah, if I knew by committing to never using violence, okay, and to never choosing to use violence to solve a problem, all right, okay, and really believe, and this is exactly what these soldiers did for Bajir. This is why it was such an impressive movement, because the Afghans were known as the fiercest warriors of all. So if they could do this, and really live with it, it meant it did take some kind of special courage. It did take some kind of where the inner strength that you have to resolve things without force is present. And it helps to neutralize someone else's imbalance. That's what you begin to do. That's your real power, that you realize the one who wants the war really is afraid. And the fear, juices up the chemicals in your body and does the reptilian brain thing and all of that. But if you know better what's going on with them, you're the one who has the power to bring it down. So we've got to keep the focus on the peace, and all our differences have got to be kept out while we're building the peace. That would be my point. I think that I feel that's critical to really being able to cut across all kinds of different types of viewpoints.
Yes.
Peace is the one thing that we all have in common.
Yeah, the psychological warfare has been very, very effective.
Yeah.
In creating people in little camps and spreading all kinds of lies to get people opposed to each other. And, I have to think about one thing that brought me here. My father telling me, his I've said it so many times, his first words out to me were, Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. And then he says, and communism's a sham. These same secret societies are behind it all. Okay, it's all a big game. Okay, and so that's what they've been playing for a long time. This game, they don't really care what you believe or not. Okay, they'll use it against you. They'll use it for them. However, okay. So the thing is that we need to just do this on our own. Okay, get musicians involved. Get everybody involved that wants to be involved in creating a better world for our children, a peaceful world. It's not that hard to understand, really. It's hard to implement. But the idea of living in a peaceful world is really quite appealing to most people.
Yesterday during a planning session for this, and today, Liz, when you talk about peace, I'm trying to be a responsive human being. It's part of my whole life to be affectable. Okay. I just read this somewhere, to have no defenses and to not defend against anything, to be wide open, I guess, and vulnerable and impactable. And when you say peace, Liz, I'm trying to imagine that's just pushing a button in me that just creates peace inside me. And I think that's a very valuable thing, to make it very personal. It opens up the possibility of hearing what you have to say about mysticism, to inspire folks to have a mystical imagination, which reminds me, Ruth, how you described getting over the fear of death. Now I could say getting over any fear is such an empowerment. It's such a relief. It's such an empowerment. But specifically to get over the fear of death is an angle as a marketer that I'm intrigued about, to help Trinde sell this peace paradigm shift, as Chris puts it, to sell it as a peace movement, as Paul and Liz allude to it, because JFK had an understanding about death that is very inspiring to me as I have studied his understanding about many things. And it is about reconciling oneself to death. And one could study his understanding and experience of health and near-death experiences to imagine why he had the courage that he had. And it's exactly your point that overcoming the fear of death gives us a tremendous amount of courage. So contact me, anybody, if you want to talk more about that, because I'm obsessed with those themes. Ruth.
Yes,
I have a-
you know, I realize that that is why they don't want any of this ancient information coming forward.
Mhm.
Because one of the ways that they manipulate people is to really take us away from our true nature, which is immortal, and that we live through lifetimes, and we move through many, many dimensions and many cycles. And when you know that, there is a kind of courage that has the courage to go past the illusion of duality. And so it never can be taken off its center. It always knows it's one with everything in all dimensions and all time.
You just reminded me of Sophie Skoll, the 17-year-old young woman in Poland or Germany who,
Sophie Scholl from Germany, part of the White Rose, head of the White Rose resistance.
right, and Ruth, what you were describing made me think, golly, if children are ourselves, it takes so much to throw away all the fear we've accrued.
I don't think you can throw it away.
Well, all right, well, okay, but to deal with it, process it,
Yeah.
but to get to the point where the joy of humanity has something to do with knowing, wow, we are immortal. And in this particular incarnation, what's my function and purpose? And the wise one would say, well, grasshopper, you'll find that by being true to yourself in every decision, morally right, wrong, good or bad for myself and others. We all might become more like a JFK who, eyes wide open, confronted very powerful forces that kill to win. So if you're going to confront them, they kill to win. And he rode in open limousines anyway.
Mhm.
And if we can embrace the mystical muscle, imagine we are immortal, we would find a lot more peace if we're being true to what we think is true, good, necessary, and therefore beneficial to life. And we become a little more unstoppable because we don't buy into the fire hose of fear that they're trying to make us just fear everyone and everything. That's how they divide us into camps, is give us reasons to fear others.
your I isn't immortal. Okay, the ego dies. The spirit is what's immortal. But let me read JFK's favorite poem. I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade. When spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air, I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair. It may be he shall take my hand and lead me into his dark land and close my eyes and quench my breath. It may be I shall pass him still. I have a rendezvous with death on some scarred slope of a battered hill when spring comes round again this year and the first meadow flowers appear. God knows 'twere better to be deep, pillowed in silk and scented down, where love throbs out in blissful sleep, pulse nigh to pulse and breath to breath, where hushed awakenings are dear. But I have a rendezvous with death at midnight in some flaming town, when spring trips north again this year, and I to pledged word am true, I shall not fail that rendezvous.
Wow.
Well,
That's incredible.
that is,
Yeah.
wow.
You know, he sacrificed himself for
Yeah.
us.
Well, that is the basis of of obviously what we're trying to connect to, again, is the larger connection of the legacy of the Fitzgeralds and what really JFK was fulfilling was, it's already been prophesied. It's already a part of the mythology, okay, that all the Fitzgeralds that died in the attempt to save the Irish people all became immortals. Okay, they all became beloved by the Irish people.
And there was a resurrection myth directly connected to Gilroy de Arla
Yeah.
and Logur, which is where JFK's ancestors farmed, right in that area. So, it's physically, literally physically connected to it.
I
And
think
getting that call that day, having that guy at the airport
right.
say it was just, talk about this, you think, oh, come on, you knew I was coming, right? There was no way that this could possibly have happened.
How did it happen?
This
Exactly.
little village called Abbeyfield, you probably never heard of it. Oh yeah, I heard of it. I heard of it all my life. My grandfather was born there, and my father almost went back and farmed it. So, how is this not possible? So this is clearly, as I said, I got the causal connection directly from that one.
Well, we actually received an email a short time ago from a gentleman from Ireland who introduced his friend who was a Fitzgerald, and he talked about him being on a quest and how he would go to Logur every solstice to basically commune with Logur. So we don't know what's going to come out of that, but it was like, here we are, 1997, getting this Fitzgerald connecting us to Newgrange, and then we get this communication in the last week from another Irishman introducing his friend,
Right.
a Fitzgerald. But, we don't know exactly where this is going or what might come of it, but we're sensing literally a vibrational level at which this is progressing. And I think that the important thing, that's why we referred to, building your mystical muscle. As we've already been talking about, the effort to disconnect people from the mystical must be understood. Imperial power is mystical power. The only way we can really end empire is by entering into the mystical realm and neutralizing the total control by the psychopaths who've taken over. I mean, they're imbalanced because they have absorbed too much power.
We've given it to them.
Yes, I know, but this is over millennia. So we know that this is a handed over situation, and they're very crafty. They have figured out how to use their power to maintain control because they are they're like heroin addicts. Imperialism, you have to view it as the most unbelievable drug in the world is that kind of power.
You can actually feel it when you're near people who have power like that, political power. When we were doing our efforts. Yes, Carol.
Oh, I just want to say one of my heroes is Aung San Suu Kyi, who wrote, "It is not power that corrupts, but fear of losing power and fear of the scourge who wield it."
You're
So
right.
I think that there's the psychopaths, but they also I feel some pity for these insane people who are so frightened and so fearful. They're looking for something, and they're bent on killing or controlling to get something which they can't find inner peace. They're not whole beings. They don't have that connection, and they're desperately seeking it outside, and they use fear and terror to try to control and kill other people and to maintain some illusion of control themselves, but they're just incredibly wounded. And what we have to do is be whole and set a better example and have some compassion and also speak truth and shatter the illusions which give them that ridiculous pedestal and power that they're hanging on to.
The psychology of it is very similar to Lord of the Rings. This really is what we're dealing with almost. Tolkien really did kind of get the essence of it in Silmarillion before he wrote the trilogy, before he wrote The Hobbit, and just as a metaphor for the nature of what it is we're dealing with here. It's a psychological thing. It's a concept of the daimon, and the daimon's out of control. And The diamond is expressing itself through people who are sensitive to these sorts of things, and they crave power. They crave the ring. They crave the power of the ring. And you really got to get that at one point. And then we discovered that, I mean, James Burnham was tutored by Tolkien. James Burnham was awarded the Medal of Honor, whatever it was, by President Reagan. And he was really the guy who created the concept of the neoconservatism. He wrote what was the one he wrote back in the 1940s, Managerial Revolution,
Right.
about the nature of the managerial class that would come in almost like robots and mindless robots and just take over everything, take control, and they would be manipulated by a small, tiny elite. And he wrote about that. He predicted it. Yeah.
Oh, Ruth, real quick, I'm real intrigued. This theme of those who are scared have this lust or go crazy for power. And if we could say something as an antidote to that, it might be to humans about our natural power. Where is our natural power? And is it our control of our own mind and emotions? And and this is what cult leaders do. And I don't want to abuse this power of they're there, you're safe, read my books, come to my events,
Yeah,
and
right.
I'll teach you how safe you are. See, that again, like Chris says, is like a gun. It's what's the intention of that message? Is it to seduce you, to exploit you? Or is it to give you the peace and the power that's possible to any individual so you can get to choice about how do you feel about your fellow human beings? How do you feel about something like working for peace?
I just wanted to say something about fear, and fear is something on darkness. I learned a lot. I lived in the Caribbean for 5 years and went through chemo, went through a disease. And the shamans took me in and they said, fear is a cocktail of emotions. And then when you eliminate fear, if you stay in a sphere of no fear, you're not at dis-ease. And when you're not at dis-ease, then disease can't get you. But the same thing goes for control. They're pumping us so much full of fear, everything that they possibly can throw fear in front of us. I think it's very remarkable because I've followed Paul and Liz for so many years that their timing now is just immaculate for going on to focusing on peace. A little synchronicity, right before I turned on the Zoom, I had on the History Channel and they were showing JFK and his interest in UFOs and ancient civilizations. And they were saying, if he keeps asking more questions, if he keeps going into this more questions, he's going to be dead. They're going to do him in.
Right.
And that was 5 minutes before I turned on to the Zoom.
Okay.
So
Wow.
the synchronicities of all of it are quite remarkable. But I think the timing of this is, I recently had an experience where I go to a Center for Spiritual Awakening. It's not a church, but the top leader is a professor and was the top quantum physicist at Naval Postgraduate School. He's going into gratitude, which is a lot, but he said, we must all be grateful for everything that's ever happened. We must all be grateful for everything that's happening right now, currently. And we must all be grateful for everything that's going to happen. And I go, wow, I must really be living in faith, because if I'm grateful for what's going on in the war overseas and Russia and everything, it's just that we definitely are in the beginning and the end.
And then there's the Grateful Dead.
Oh yeah, I knew them. I knew those guys.
I
So-
remember, first of all, I feel like when we talk about gratitude, eternal gratitude for everything, there's a languaging about that state of remembering who we are and remembering the real power of creation that we are, that there are no mistakes and there's nothing that's happening randomly, that everything is part of our own consciousness manifesting. So when we understand that there's a respect for everything that happens to us as something we have created to reflect back to us, to awaken us to our true nature. And the fact that we're reflecting such darkness is because so many of us have fallen asleep, and we need to wake up. So that in some ways, the gratitude is a way of talking about that kind of remembering of the intelligence behind things. But I wanted to get back to what it was I forgot, because I was remembering, I feel like every single, in my lifetime, people that have been sacrificed have gotten to this place. I was thinking about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, John Lennon. Each, there are so many of them. But they got to this place beyond politics, as you were talking about. They got to love. They got to a place where they were attracting people to this place beyond duality, to a wholeness. And the moment that they got there, that's when they became threatening. When they had power, when they had a lot of people paying attention to them, it was okay. But as soon as John Lennon really started talking about love, he had to be killed. And as soon as Malcolm X went beyond religion, went beyond politics, went beyond race, bingo.
Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
war when he got.
We have to remember the insight of Jimi Hendrix, who said, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace.
Perfect. Yeah.
Music,
Yeah. Yeah.
Music,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
music is magic.
Right.
Music is magic, and I can't wait for this concert.
I know. I know. Well, it has.
Oh, yeah, we can.
I'm curious if
Oh,
there,
no, I can't.
I'm curious if there are action steps that you are seeing.
I'm still at Woodstock.
Wow.
I figure I went into a unity consciousness with 250,000 people, so there's probably a reason why parts of me are still back there. We
I
came
was at
close.
Monterey and saw Jimmy.
Yeah, I knew Jimmy too. Yeah.
I wanted to ask something about action steps that you might have that maybe some of us can align with and assist with. I feel like this is so exciting that it needs to start happening
I
right now.
know. I know. Well, we
It
are
is
putting out
happening.
the word, and we are getting feedback from people who have many different experiences and talents that may be able to contribute. That's what we're doing right now. So there are definitely some, I think some experience levels that obviously, we're opening up to. So
We'll get together a web page to start gathering thoughts and ideas about it, and where people can come and sign up on the sign up sheet and say, hey, let's get involved. Because again, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people.
Yeah.
It's going to take, work.
This is something from before that I just remembered, and it's about fear. Because fear is a power. It's an energy that comes into us to motivate us. But when fear is defined by a limited identity, it coagulates and stagnates and becomes this thing that creates a very limited imagination and cuts us off from our conductive relationship with wholeness, the whole universe. And so we have a very limited plate to play with when we have fear. But the energy of fear is actually the energy of vitality, if we have an identity that stays connected with our whole identity. So it's not just fear, it's a story. It's a coagulation of energy in a self-limiting story that happens in our body.
we need to recognize that kind of person, and we need to bring out our hero who is going to basically do the right thing, which is to be receptive and to be open and empathetic. That is the only thing that can help break that down in people. And so we've got to make that. That's what I said. We all have to become warriors for peace, just like what Bachir Han did with his Afghan warriors. He turned them from warriors for war into warriors for peace.
He flipped the switch.
That's right. And they became so powerful, that's what Gandhi said, that once the Afghans committed to peace, they never turned back.
And nonviolence is a very strong key to
Yeah.
this, because violence begets violence.
Right. You got to be ready to make that commitment.
Remember, this is not a new movement, this thing called
Amen.
peace.
Amen.
It's been going on for decades and decades and decades. Well, we see millennia. So it is not a small commitment that you're endeavoring to do, and it is my honor and privilege to support it.
Right.
Onwards,
Okay.
Yay, thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
onwards.
Great.
On our
Thank you,
way.
everybody.
It's a great presentation.
Oh, it was
Liz.
wonderful.
Thank you.